Welcome to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Joining me now, you know him, former 30-year federal prosecutor, currently has a great Substack publication, also the Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner on YouTube, which is wildly popular. Over 1 million people now. It's crazy. It is my friend, your friend. It is Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, nice to see you.
Dean, always great to be with you, my friend.
Look, we're all going to just talk law. I know you don't talk politics, but let me ask you objectively, as someone who is a lawyer and looks at the facts and everything, Donald Trump was the art of the deal guy. He hasn't made one deal. Nothing. He's going to solve the wars. We have more wars. There's no tariff deals. He's starting a civil war. We have a war in the Middle East. Did I miss something about where the art of the deal part of this was?
No, he can't negotiate his way out of a paper bag. I mean, this guy is like, hey, I made a deal with China. Well, I guess I didn't make a deal with you. Well, I made a deal with... Come on now. The guy can negotiate absolutely nothing. And listen, Dean, we all know that he just wants to enrich himself and maybe, enrich his family members. That's what he's doing with his Bitcoin, his whatever they're called, his $1 million fundraisers for which he's delivering pardons. He's enriching himself. He doesn't care about the rest of us. And I think he's getting more desperate, not more confident by the day. And that's why he's got to seize control of the California National Guard. He's got to throw himself a military parade. I interviewed Senator Whitehouse yesterday, and I'll be posting that later today on my YouTube channel. But, we were talking about how this is not sustainable. What Donald Trump is doing, I won't call it governing, I'll call it ruling over the American people, is not sustainable. And, eventually this whole thing is going to implode. I don't know when, I don't know how. I hope to hell our democracy survives when everything implodes. But, listen, you can't surround yourself with the kind of idiots and sycophants and lapdogs and flunkies that he has and expect to be able to successfully run government. So it ain't sustainable.
No, it's not. And I think Senator Whitehouse makes a great point. There's books on fascism and tyrants. I just read an interesting one, How Tyrants Fall, written by Marcel Dersis, who's on our show. And he is from Germany. We interviewed him in Germany. And in the book, and he cites a lot of backup for this, when the leader is sending the military into the street, and this interview happened a month ago, not now, but in the book it talks about when the leader needs to send the military out, that's when they become more weak. Because when they can control by just fear, and people are like, well, you can't stand up to this guy, they're at their apex of power. Trump is descending in power, the military, and then if he turns the military on Americans, that really is the lowest level of power of a dictator because it always causes a backlash. Especially, Glenn, we're Americans in our DNA from childhood. When you learn going to school, we rebelled against the king, a mad king. That's who we are as Americans. And I sincerely think that Donald Trump doesn't get what it means to be an American. And I'm not sounding jarring to people, but I sincerely don't believe he gets what it means to be an American.
Dean, it's such an important point. All of this is a sign of weakness, not strength, right? If he could rule by fear, he would, but he can't. So he has to try to find, excuses, pretexts to deploy the military to the streets. And some people have been saying recently, because tomorrow is the big rally, but you know what? We're just getting warmed up, Dean. They're going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Tomorrow is the No Kings Day rally. I'll be speaking at my local one here in Leesburg, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. And I've had a lot of people say, well, wait a minute. If we get out to protest in huge numbers, doesn't that give Donald Trump a reason to, I don't know, invoke the Insurrection Act, declare martial law, get the military out, and use the military against the people who are exercising their First Amendment rights to free speech and to, assemble and petition our government for a redress of grievances? Aren't we damned if we do and damned if we don't? I said, you know what? We may be damned if we do, and damned if we don't. So what say we do? How about we do rather than sitting inside, and that will actually strengthen the aspiring dictator. Damned if we do, damned if we don't. Well, let's get out there and do. And you hit the nail right on the head, Dean. When he starts turning the military against the citizenry, and he may, remember during his first term, he said, why can't the military just shoot protesters in the legs? He may. I'm not scared. I'm not looking forward to having my military, where I served proudly for 6.5 years on active duty, turned against the citizenry. But if it happens, it may be the last straw, and that may spell Donald Trump's political demise. So let's get out and protest in massive numbers tomorrow. Let's just keep it peaceful.
Absolutely. And you mentioned you served in the US Army for 6+ years. You were in JAG, Judge Advocate General. as an attorney there. Trump's having a birthday party for himself. He's using our military, your army. He's using that you served in, that is part of the United States of America, and spending 45, 50 million plus of our tax dollars. As someone who's serving the army, what is your reaction to the idea of celebrating the birthday of the army, but then Donald Trump hijacking it and making it about himself?
Yeah, it is right out of Kim Jong-un's playbook, Putin's playbook, right? Adore me, adore me, adore me, because I am dear leader. And here is what I've been saying, and I'm actually in talking with some experts on not just military law, but on the need to obey lawful orders and disobey unlawful orders. Because I've been saying for a long time, Dean, I think it will ultimately come down to Donald Trump trying to use the military to keep him in power, because he's losing his grip on power every day. And I believe that the U.S. military understands that they take an oath to the Constitution, not to a president, not to a dictator, not to a tyrant, and that they must disobey unlawful orders. And Donald Trump is on the cusp of issuing unlawful orders. He did it when he just tried to federalize and activate and seize control of the California National Guard. And Judge Breyer out in California said, you did it both unlawfully in violation of federal law, federal statute, and unconstitutionally in violation of the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And I think the military needs to pay close attention to what they're being asked to do. And when those law orders lapse into the unlawful, they must stand up and disobey them.
And I was going to ask you about that because Judge Breyer, it's a federal judge appointed by Bill Clinton, who last night, and I was reading the opinion today, and it's on hold temporarily, the U.S. Court of Appeals. They've not overruled it. They're going to have more oral arguments on Tuesday, if I remember correctly. But the judge said in the oral argument, there's a difference between a constitutional government and King George. Yep. And he said, it's not that a leader can simply say something and then it becomes it. It's a question of a leader, a president, or governor follows the law set forth in the Constitution and statutes. You had a judge, and he's an older judge. He's been around a long time, talking about the difference between a king, which is what Trump aspires to, and a president of the United States of America. And I found that remarkable, really inspiring, but also frightening on a different level. The judge sees exactly what this is.
Yeah, it's unusual for judges to be that, I'll call it forward leaning in their language, either in court during argument or in their written opinion. But Judge Breyer hit the nail right on the head. You know, Donald Trump used this federal statute, 10 USC, was it 12460, or I have to look at it to make sure I'm quoting the federal statute correctly. But there are four things in that federal statute that must be done or must be present for Donald Trump to federalize the National Guard. And he violated all four. So yes, it's on hold right now for just a couple of days. Yes, the appeals court in California will take it up on Tuesday. But I'm telling you, this 36-page opinion, Dean, is bulletproof. And as long as we have judges and ultimately justices, when this gets up to the Supreme Court, who are honest brokers of the facts, the law, and the Constitution, this will become the law of the land, because the rationale and the reasoning and the supporting case law is unassailable. So let's hope that all of the judges and justices get this one right for the sake of our democracy.
You know, and I read the opinion earlier today. In case people don't know, I'm also a lawyer, but I haven't practiced in a long time. But I still, in this world, thank God I went to law school, because everything's law. And I practiced law for about 6-7 years as a litigator. But I love that the judge said the idea that individuals' right to protest the government is one of the fundamental rights protected by the First Amendment. And just because some stray bad actors go too far does not wipe out that right for everyone. And that's what the Trump administration was essentially arguing to the court. That, hey, okay, there may be some peaceful ones, but there are some bad people. So all the peaceful ones lose their First Amendment rights. And the judge said, absolutely not. And they gave a whole bunch of citations, including Supreme Court, that says they reject that. You can't be, because there's people 4 blocks away lighting a car on fire, the rest of us lose our rights. And that's what they were literally arguing. That's how lawless and unconstitutional this administration is.
It was such an important point by Judge Breyer, because, listen, I worked protests as a prosecutor in Washington, D.C., which is, Mecca for political protests. And here's what I saw happen over and over and over again. Police would usually act appropriately. They would protect the First Amendment free speech rights of the protesters. But if people started throwing rocks, if people started breaking windows, if people started looting stores, they would be arrested in the event there were sufficient police resources to arrest those people. Sometimes there weren't. They just had to continue to engage in crowd control to protect everybody, including themselves, the officers. What I will tell you, though, Dean, when those cases came into my office, the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, where we prosecuted all federal crime and all local crime in D.C., including arrests made during the course of protests, 90% of the time, please don't anybody quote me. I'm trying to remember back to my old days when I was doing intake and screening and making charging decisions, which the prosecutors make. 90% of the time, those cases were not charged. They were no papered. In other words, we say, listen, we appreciate that you made arrests to the best of your ability, but unless there is evidence we can use to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this particular protester committed a crime, and if we have video proof of it, or we have officer testimony that, yeah, this man threw a rock and it hit me in the head, or yeah, I caught this guy holding a bunch of clothes running out of a store that was being looted, then we will bring that case. We will bring that charge. But listen, protests can get pretty animated. Some of them can get pretty volatile. And, you know, most of the people who are arrested during protests, we wouldn't even have the evidence to bring a charge against them. So here's the advice I'm giving everybody about tomorrow's rally. Listen, first of all, be peaceful. Get in good trouble, but be peaceful. If somebody tries to place you under arrest, I know it's counterintuitive and it is contrary to the adrenaline surge we all feel when somebody is applying force to us. Don't resist. You know, let them, if they want to put flex cuffs on you, let them do it. If they actually try to bring a charge against you, chances are good, particularly if you didn't engage in violence or looting, you're not going to be charged. I know I'm not saying lay down and I'm not saying take it, but don't give the police an excuse to ratchet up the force they need to take you into custody if they're going to try to take you into custody. You know, Dean, I served with so many police officers in DC, both federal and local. And the one thing I have seen, particularly in excessive force cases, I handled some of those as a prosecutor, is there's no controlling the adrenaline surge that people feel. That is both the police when they are confronted with a dangerous situation and a protester when force is being applied to them. And that adrenaline surge explodes in us, and it's hard to control. Even the most disciplined, well-meaning public servant who is a police officer, I think, has a hard time controlling that adrenaline surge. That's what leads to some of the excessive force cases. Now, some officers shouldn't be wearing a badge on the chest and the gun on the hip because they are prejudiced and they have no reason, they have no right to, you know, assert authority over the citizenry. And those are the people that we have to spot when they're applying to become police officers. That's probably the most important moment when it comes to police reform, where we can actually do something about it. But the overwhelming majority of law enforcement are protect and serve people, but that doesn't mean they don't experience that adrenaline surge. So don't resist. I mean, don't give them an excuse to arrest you, but if they try, don't resist, because it's all likely going to work out okay at the end of the day.
And I'll add my little 2 cents, because I was never a full-time prosecutor, but in New Jersey, the local prosecutor, each municipality is appointed by the mayor and council. And I worked at a firm where one of the partners was appointed the prosecutor of South Hackensack, but I did it for 2 years. And I would go there every week in night court, just like on TV night court. And the biggest thing I found, if you were nice to the officer, they were willing to make a deal. If you're a jerk to the officer, they're going to charge you more and they're not going to make a deal. So if you're in a big situation with a lot of people, I know it's much harder. Glenn's absolutely right. Adrenaline's going, people are yelling and screaming. But I'm not kidding. If you were a nice officer, yes officer, no officer, if it's a trooper, yes trooper, no trooper, they will treat you much nicer. And ultimately, they'll be much more willing to dismiss a charge at the end of the day if you didn't do anything horrific, or agree to a plea deal that's like a misdemeanor or a pretrial intervention type of program. But if you're a jerk to them, folks, they're going to do nothing. Many times I go to the officer and he'd be like, let me look at the guy. And he look at his notes. He goes, that guy was horrible to me. I'm like, okay, no deal. And I'd go back to their attorney and go, no deal. And I say, why? And I tell him, like, okay, what can you do? Or other times, yeah, he was okay guy. I have no notes about him. Let's make a deal. And that's just, that's real life. That's practical advice, folks, in the real world. How you treat the officers, generally how they're going to treat you later in the courtroom. And it's really helpful. It's very helpful situation. So, well, I wanted to get back to something you touched on because people watching or listening might have family in the military. And we hear a lot that the military is not obligated to obey illegal orders. But I imagine as a practical matter, that's a much more challenging thing. Yeah. You served in the Army and JAG Corps as a lawyer. Can you give any advice to people as a practical matter? They're in the military. They get an order from Donald Trump through their superior officer that is clearly illegal. What do you really do as a practical matter?
Yeah, it's fraught with peril because you disobey an order at your own peril if you believe it's an illegal order. Dean, one of the things I had to do as an Army JAG officer was advise commanders when they would give an order to a troop and the soldier decided it's not a lawful order and I can't obey it. Then the commander would come to me as the legal advisor to the command, which is what the prosecutors are. And he would say, I want to now punish this soldier either with what's called Article 15 non-judicial punishment, which is very low-level punishment that a commander can impose on a soldier for minor military offenses. But the soldier has an absolute right to turn down that kind of punishment, non-judicial punishment, and demand a court-martial. And I would say, okay, Captain or Major, tell me what you ordered the soldier to do. Tell me all of the circumstances surrounding it. And provided it was a lawful order, I will support you in one, offering the soldier non-judicial punishment, and two, if the soldier turns it down, I will pursue court-martial charges. Not my decision to make. It's the general, the convening authority, we call it, of the installation where you're working. But I had officers come to me and they clearly ordered a soldier to do something that was not lawful. And I would say, listen, I recommend you don't offer him non-judicial punishment because I am telling you as your legal representative, your legal advisor, if he turns it down, I will not court-martial him because I cannot make the case against him because it wasn't a lawful order. Here's something that I would recommend to all service members. There's something called the GI hotline. And I don't have the number, but you can, I think GI Rights Hotline or GI Hotline, you can just Google it. And they are there in real time to provide the best advice they can to soldiers on this, and soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines, all military members on this precise issue. Is it lawful? Is it not lawful? But here's the thing, Dean, you kind of know an unlawful order when you see it, when you receive it. So I would say, let your conscience and more importantly, your oath to the Constitution be your guide because you didn't take a loyalty pledge to a dictator or a tyrant or a man or a president. You took an oath of loyalty to the Constitution and you would be violating that oath if you obeyed unlawful orders being given by an aspiring dictator.
It's interesting. I'm talking with Glenn Kirschner. It's interesting, Glenn, because we can sit here very analytically and academically talk about, hey, it's an illegal order. Tell your superior officer you're not going to follow it. But I can't imagine the pressure on a young private or a corporal, whatever lower level officer, or enlisted man, and you've got, the lieutenant or captain saying, Donald Trump said, put your bayonet down there and we want you to charge into the crowd. And you're like, I think that's illegal, but all of the other people in your troop's about to do it as well. And so I can only imagine how challenging it is that you're saying the GI hotline, and can you call at that moment? And is there enough time, especially if it's ambiguous or if it's right on its face, if it's like shoot civilians, that's illegal. Everyone's going to know that. There's no way any loyal American in our military is going to follow that. I guess it's the more ambiguous ones that raise this kind of questions. Is this constitutional? Is this legal or not?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, Dean, nobody said fulfilling your oath of loyalty to the Constitution that you voluntarily took was going to be easy. Nothing about it is easy. But the other thing I would say is that I don't think the soldiers, the enlisted folks, the NCOs, and even the low-level officers are really going to be the ones who have to stand up to a president who is delivering illegal orders. I think it's largely the upper echelon, the command structure of the military services. And here's the one thing that I think is a pretty significant miscalculation by Trump and Pete Hegseth and whatever other clowns he's got running roughshod over the military and the Constitution. They believe that they can fire their way through ethical military leadership. For example, they fired the 3 judge advocate generals, the 3 top lawyers for the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy, thinking what? That the people underneath them are going to do Donald Trump's criminal bidding, unethical bidding, unconstitutional bidding. They're dead wrong, because they were all taught in Officer Basic, the same thing I was taught. They were all taught in the JAG school, where you go after you graduate law school, but before you go out to the field for your first assignment. They were taught the same thing about the absolute requirement, non-negotiable requirement, that you disobey unlawful orders. So it's not going to be so much a soldier by soldier by soldier determination.
Okay.
It's going to have to be the military leadership that steps up and resists an out of control, unlawful, unconstitutional president.
And the last 2 things, both about, I want to shift gears and talk about Senator Padilla and what happened to him. First of all, is there any potential for criminal charges against the people who put their hands on Senator Padilla and assaulted him? And we saw a clear assault. He identified himself as a U.S. Senator, tried to ask a question, and was immediately assaulted like he was a terrorist attacking, the president.
So here's what I'll say. Anytime a federal offense is potentially committed, like an offense committed on federal property in a federal building, it also may violate state law, because each federal building is located in a state, and that state has what's called concurrent jurisdiction, dual jurisdiction over a criminal act that's committed, even if it happens to violate a federal law. So what I hope happens is that the state law enforcement and prosecutorial authorities in California investigate a possible violation of California state law when it appears that Senator Padilla was assaulted. Now, I don't want to take the position definitively that he was assaulted, because as a career prosecutor, I need to see all the evidence. And we know the videotape starts, I guess, shortly after whatever it is that kicked this off. But I find it very hard to believe that Senator Padilla was, aggressively and in a threatening manner lunging at Kristi Noem. I mean, who the hell wants to lunge at Kristi Noem? Certainly not any dog wants
She's
to
a puppy killer. Right,
yeah.
Exactly. She's a puppy killer.
Yeah, and I hate to add levity to this, because it's a deadly serious circumstance. But I have a hard time believing that the amount of force that we see being exercised against Senator Padilla was lawful, was not excessive, and was called for based on whatever happened at the moment before the video, picked up what was going on. But here's the thing, video always tells a piece of the story, but you need the eyewitnesses. If it were me, if I were a California prosecutor, I would be cutting grand jury subpoenas all day and all night to get the grand jury testimony of everybody in that room who had any firsthand information about what went on, what they saw, what they heard. Because the other thing is, what people say, whether it's before, during, or after the incident, can be some of the most telling and probative evidence. So you need to conduct a full investigation, and I hope the California authorities are going to do that, because one thing we know, Donald Trump's Department of Justice will not investigate anything that is not in Donald Trump's interest to being investigated.
Look at what happened. We had Representative McIver in New Jersey bump up against ICE agents in a melee that was clearly a melee, and they just charged her with 2 felonies. They got a grand jury indicting her, 2 felonies and a misdemeanor. So I hope, and I would love the DA in LA County or the AG's office to investigate, to get that media narrative out there that we are going on the offensive. We're not going to let Donald Trump try to intimidate us. I'm going to take away your funding, or we're going to put you in jail. We are going to investigate your people, and let's see how you protect them. The last thing, and I know there's no legal basis for this, but I still want to get your reaction to it. because I think it deserves far more attention. Senator Padilla, by the way, was standing there peacefully. What prompted him to react, because he said it in interviews on MSNBC, was the comment by Kristi Noem. And I'll read it for people because this deserves far more press. I wrote about it for Substack today because I so want the media to cover it because they are telling you the plan. Trump never hides it. She had prepared speech and she said about leaving LA. They said, we are going to stay in LA until the city is, quote, liberated from the socialist and burdensome leadership that this governor and mayor have placed on this country. Literally calling for liberation, regime change of the governor and the mayor. And they're going to keep the military occupation going until then. And I don't know why that doesn't get more press, because that's one of the most jarring things I've ever heard a cabinet official say. And she said in prepared remarks, this is the Trump regime playbook. They're telling you. Is there any legal basis you can think of that if you accuse someone of being a socialist, you can overturn an election or remove a governor and put in a pro-Trump pro-Trump puppet as governor?
It sounds like Kristi Noem is advocating for an insurrection to overthrow a state government. Plain and simple. Let's take her at her word. Let's criminally investigate it, because they can scream supremacy clause all day long, which loosely speaking means federal law controls over state law, is supreme. If there's a conflict between federal law and state law, that doesn't give federal government or federal officials the right to advocate for and launch an insurrection against the state court government. We've got that 10th Amendment, which separates the powers of the federal government, which are few and enumerated, and the powers of the states and the people, which are unlimited. Come on now. If you're going to announce an insurrection against the state, we're going to take you at your word, and we're going to hold you accountable for it.
Well, Glenn, I want to thank you for joining us, and I really recommend people watch Glenn's Substack. It comes out every night. I watch some of your Substack. Someone put a note, Dean's watching. I didn't even know how they knew I was there, but I was watching, talk about Mahmoud Khalil and Abrego Garcia's case and updating people on that, and it's great work. You make it so accessible. Like, we all understand it. Doesn't matter I'm a lawyer. I'm like, you see, those are good points. He's very smart. And Glenn, also YouTube, right? Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner. People can check that out.
Yep. Every day I'm putting up a legal analysis video. Today it'll be an interview that I did yesterday with Senator Whitehouse. I'll also put up a second video about, I really kind of tease out some of what Judge Briers said in this opinion that has not gotten much attention, but there's some really good nuggets in there that describe Donald Trump. So, I am putting videos up every day. So feel free to come on over. It's always free. Hit subscribe on YouTube. We've gone over 1 million subscribers, and that's very gratifying. And I really am humbled by it. But yeah, come on over to the YouTube channel as well.
And please click subscribe on mine if you're watching this on YouTube. Well, you don't have any hats to sell, any shirts, any Justice Matters?
I got more Justice merch than you can shake a stick at. Yeah, there's actually a merch shop that one of my daughters created for me on my YouTube channel. So if you really want some merchandise that's Team Justice and Justice Matters, have a look. This is not what I had on my bingo card when I retired from the Department of Justice. Didn't think I'd be doing any of this.
I just picture you and Frank Veluzzi going around selling stuff at event after event.
Yeah, push carts.
Yeah, that's right. So, all right, Glenn, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. Have a great night, everyone. Subscribe to Glenn's Substack. Please subscribe to mine. I'm very needy. Have a great night.